I'm making raw chocolate candy today. It looks like this when it's done. Now at the end of the video, I say that you can store it in either the freezer or the refrigerator. On second thought, I'd say store it in the freezer when you're done. Cut it up in these smaller pieces, and when you want a piece, take one out. This does have nuts. It has pecans, and it also has blended cashews, so keep that in mind. Also, I'm making a half batch only because I'm low on one of the ingredients. If you make a full batch, it might even be easier, but it will be more expensive, and you'll see why a few of these ingredients are a little pricey, and you're going to want to write down and look for some of these. Now, I get the cacao butter that I'm going to use from Vitacost.com in a big block. Some of the other things like the palm sugar, I'm finding that at some regular grocery stores recently. In the Chicago area, like Mariano's had it, and Village Marketplace even had it. Sometimes you can find it at Whole Foods, but a lot of those things you can find online. So here we go. It's pretty easy to make, and you end up freezing it and then cutting it up and freezing it again. The first ingredient that's in this candy is called cacao butter. Now when I bought it, and when you buy it, it comes in this huge block. Like, how could you possibly measure it? So I got a little creative some time ago. I don't have much left. And I decided I wanted to measure it in tablespoons. So I chopped up the block and I put it in a double boiler. And then I used a tablespoon and put 1 tablespoon into each of these little slots of an old ice cube tray. And then it hardens right in room temperature. So I just set the ice cube tray with 1 tablespoon of the cacao butter in each slot on the kitchen counter. Just let it sit there and harden. And after it finished hardening, I just put them into a small, really thick Ziploc bag. This is actually a freezer bag. But then I just store this in the cabinet. It doesn't need to be refrigerated or frozen. So now, because I don't have much left, I'm going to use a half a cup of these. And like I said, each one is a tablespoon. So a half a cup is equal to 8 tablespoons. So what I'm going to do is put 8 tablespoons into a double boiler. So for those of you who haven't been baking long, what's a double boiler? Well, it's a pan of water. And I don't have a double boiler pan, so I'm making one up. And the thing is, you don't want the water to touch the bottom of the bowl. And use a metal bowl. So I put that in there, and then I just make sure the water's not touching. If it was, I'd get rid of some of the water. So I'm going to let the water simmer, and I'm going to put in 8 of these 1 tablespoon cacao butters. And you might ask, well, why don't you just throw it in the microwave? Well, they don't microwave, or not well. So I'm going to put those in 2, 4, 6, and 8. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So we'll move on to our next ingredients. For our first ingredients, I'm going to start with half a cup of raw honey. Now, raw honey comes in different formats. Some are very liquidy and some are really thick. I would suggest a liquidy one for this. And put it right in my blender. Maybe even use a spatula to get it all out. You can even put a tiny bit of oil inside a measuring cup first if you want. Just to oil the measuring cup and so that the honey slides right out. And I'm doing a half a cup of raw cashews. Now, because I'm doing a half of a half-size recipe, it should be interesting to see how this goes. Because sometimes in a blender, something that's too small of a amount can be not enough to blend. So what I'm going to do is play with this And I won't necessarily make you watch the whole thing, but you can see it's starting to blend in here. But it just needs a little help, and because it's a half a batch, it might take a little longer, and I'll just mess around with it with the spatula until it's blended. Okay, now for the rest of the ingredients. I have a large bowl, and I have cacao powder, and I'm going to put in a half a cup of cacao powder. I also have coconut palm sugar, a half a cup, and a 1/4 teaspoon of sea salt or pink Himalayan sea salt. Excuse me, did I say a 1/4 teaspoon? What did I meant to say? And it calls for a vanilla bean. I should be putting in half of a vanilla bean scraped, but I don't have that. So I'm going to put in a half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then I'm also going to put in a half a cup of pecans, chopped pecans. And I like these because, why do I like these? They're just kind of good in this candy. And I'm just going to give this a stir. And then I'm going to stir in the honey and blended cashew mix. And it's okay if the cashew mix is a little, you know, like not totally smooth. It's okay if it's got a little bit of pieces in it. So the thing is that it's in the blender like this. So use a spatula, a spoon, whatever, to get as much out of it as possible. That's the one thing about using the blender instead of the food processor, but you really can't use the food processor for this because it wouldn't blend it enough. But if there's ever a choice, I'll use the food processor because it's easier to get everything out. So I'm, let's see, getting as much as I can. Can you see that out of the corner? So use a rubber spatula, scrape it off, and then on the stove right now, I have the cacao butter, and it has finished melting nicely on the double boiler, and it's just sitting there waiting for me to get it out. I want to get every last bit of this honey, and I want every little bit that I can get out of here. So use whatever methods you have. If you want to get a spoon and get it in there, do it. Alright, so get as much as you can. You can give it a stir. Here we go. Okay. Alright, my battery ran out of juice. Or my camera ran out of juice. So you're just going to stir this somewhat. And I've had this huge spatula here now, and now I'm going to grab, this is a plastic spoon, not a wooden spoon, but now I'm ready to pour in the cacao butter. All right. And I'm going to use a pot holder because it's, obviously it's hot. Alright, so I have it in this bowl, and I'm just going to pour it like that, and then I don't want to put my arm in front of you. I'm going to come over here, and now I'm stirring it and stirring it and stirring it. Okay. So it doesn't look anything like candy right now. And hopefully you're hearing that someone is mowing their lawn. Can you hear that? Okay, so now I'm making this really interesting mix. And now I'm ready to pour it into a glass dish. I have a small glass dish here. Here's my hand inside, so that's how small the dish is. But like I said, I made a half of a batch, so giving it one more stir There's a little bit of it that's kind of liquidy because of the cacao butter that you just saw me mixing it. And I'm just going to pour this in here. And it's not really going to have much of a form. If I was making a full batch, it could probably fill this dish. So I'm going to make a form kind of like this, but the way it's turning out is okay. And I'm going to get it just by pressing it down to a thickness I want. You don't need it to be very thick because this is meant to be just a treat. And now we're going to put it into the freezer for at least 30 minutes. Okay, it's kind of dark in this part of my freezer, but this is the only place I could set it. So I'm going to put it in here for at least 30 minutes. And I actually have to leave for a little while, so it's going to be longer than that. My candy was in the freezer for about an hour and a half. And what I would suggest is that when you bring it out and let it sit on your counter for a few minutes before you attempt to cut it. Now, as you saw from my freezer, it's overstuffed. And so the way that I set it in there, it tilted a little bit. So my candy is not absolutely pretty. It's actually thicker on one side. But that's okay. It's candy. And as I said before, if you double this half batch that I've done, it will fit into this pan better. So what I've done, I've taken a large knife and I've just cut along here and made some other cuts, and then I got a smaller knife out and I'm going to lift out some pieces. And I would suggest that you either keep it frozen or cut it up into bite-sized pieces and put it into an airtight container and put it back in the freezer, maybe separated by layers of wax paper. That'd be good. I think I put it in the refrigerator before too, but it's been a while since I've made it. And it actually really is good, and that's how you make raw chocolate.